Belmont was able to perform a service which he would repeat in subsequent panics, and which helped make him a friend to bankers and to the United States government. By negotiating large loans from the Rothchilds, he was able to shore up United States debtor banks. In other words, he was able, thanks to the hugeness of the Rothschild reservoir of capital, to start out in America operating, wait for this, his own Federal Reserve System. Tuesday, April 16th, 2024, Maneko 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today we're going to look at the symbiotic relationship between central banks, Wall Street, and government. And we're going to refer to this book here, Our Crowd, to show you what it's all about. And this book was referred to me by someone who was part of this crowd, or his family was part of this crowd anyway. And I think it's important to look at that right now because the drums of war, of course, are beating very loudly. Bond yields are going back up, and it's got everything to do with this symbiotic relationship. Before I do, though, I'd just like to point out that Miles Franklin has got some new specials this week. They've got 1 ounce silver kangaroos at $3.19 over spot. They've got pre-1965 dimes and quarters, $2.75 over spot. So if you're looking to continue to load up on silver or even gold, make sure you email them, info@milesfranklin.com, or you can call them on 1-800-822-8080 and mention Mario or Maneko 64. Here in the UK, of course, Gold Investments have their usual specials, and they can be found below in the description of this video. So back to our crowd, central banking, Wall Street, government. And the reason I want to talk about this today is because we're seeing Treasury yields continue to rise. I've been speaking for over a year about the level at 4.33, which we broke out of last year and then went almost straight up to 5% on the 10-year. We came back down from October until the end of last year. And now it's picked back up and it's gone comfortably above that 433 level, or more exactly, we're at 464 as I speak here this morning in London. And that's not good for the whole system. Prior to the Federal Reserve, when liquidity dried up and Wall Street and the markets got overstretched, and they had crises, i.e. when rates started spiking, people like JP Morgan and others on Wall Street had to step in with their own reserves, their real reserves of gold, to bail the whole system out. And they got tired of it, of course. And I think 1907 was the last big crisis under a non-central banking system. And it triggered, of course, the move towards the Federal Reserve. It was justified as being something to create, an institution to create a flexible currency. It was an institution that would stop bank runs and make everything more stable. Just like World War I was the war to end all wars. You get the gist. So that's why I think it's important to look at this right now, because we're usually told by the chairman of the Federal Reserve every time he steps up at the FOMC press conference every 6 weeks or so, that they're there to keep the economy going, to keep full employment. But I would say that's just for public consumption. And the real reason why central banks, Wall Street, and government have a symbiotic relationship is that they help each other out. Without government, i.e. Congress, and the executive to have signed the Federal Reserve Act, we wouldn't have the Federal Reserve. Without the central bank, the federal government wouldn't be able to go out and fight wars or spend billions and now trillions on programs so they can buy votes. And Wall Street is the same. Without the government or the central bank, Wall Street can't lend to speculators, to funds, in order to try to make as much profit as possible. They could, but they would be at risk. And that's what used to happen prior to the Federal Reserve Act being signed into law on December 23rd, 1913. Case in point, the 1907 crisis, where we saw JP Morgan having to step up to the plate at the risk of putting his bank in danger. So that's the relationship between the symbiotic relationship between the central bank, government, and Wall Street. The other thing is that all these wars, of course, they strengthen the health of the state, but they also strengthen the health of corporations and Wall Street, because it provides Wall Street and corporations with new markets, with cheap labor, with cheap resources. And it's nothing about the domestic U.S. economy. Of course, the U.S. economy will benefit, but ideally for them, it's all about increasing their wealth, power, and control. So this book here, Our Crowd, and it's entitled Our Crowd, The Great Jewish Families of New York, Stephen Birmingham. And it was written in 1967. And I've read this book 2 or 3 times. It was recommended by Jim Sinclair, whose original family name was Seligman. And the Seligmans were part of this crowd. I'm not sure why he changed his name to Sinclair. But the first time I read it, I didn't catch this. There's a section here where it talked about or inferred about the symbiotic relationship. And I think it's something really important that you need to know. And why? Well, because it shows you who your real enemy is. It shows you that government, Wall Street, and the central banks are not there to help you, but take advantage of you. So let's just go through what it says here about this book. And I know it's about the great Jewish families of New York, but this applies to all banks. It doesn't matter if they're Jewish or not. It just happens to be that this guy wrote about our crowd. So this is from the Chicago Tribune. The dynasts of Jewish society, their wives and children, their uncles, aunts, and cousins, their horses and houses, chefs and showgirls, their clubs, art collections, parties, and eccentricities, their rich culture and astonishing benevolence, their very human capacity for foolishness and greatness. LA Times. They have referred to themselves as the 100 as opposed to the 400. They have been called the Jewish Grand Dukes. Stephen Birmingham relates the story of a group in American society which could provide the substance, plots, and characters for half a dozen novels. So, and I think writing this book, Stephen Birmingham, he interviewed these aunts and these wives, a lot of people that were involved or part of this 100 Club, or Our Crowd, as the book is called. So it's not like he just made this up. He actually sat down with these people and talked about things. But one passage here that really piqued my interest about a year and a half or two ago is this. And it's on page 40 if you're able to get this edition. In the Panic of 1837, Belmont was able to perform a service which he would repeat in subsequent panics, and which helped make him a friend to bankers and to the United States government. By negotiating large loans from the Rothchilds, he was able to shore up United States debtor banks. In other words, he was able, thanks to the hugeness of the Rothschild reservoir of capital, to start out in America operating, wait for this, his own Federal Reserve System. So I'll stop right here. That's all I wanted to tell you about. And who was August Belmont? Well, his real name was August Schonberg. Schon means a beautiful, and Berg means mountain, beautiful mountain. And he made his name less German and changed it to Belmont. And he arrived in the United States via Cuba just in time for the Panic of 1837. And he started out as an office boy at the age of 13 at the Rothschild Bank in Frankfurt, Germany. The rumor is that he was a Rothschild, that he was like a bastard son, but that's beside the point. He went there as a Rothschild agent, and he became a very famous, very wealthy man. The Belmont Stakes horse race, that's named after him. What I found interesting in that comment is that, yes, the Rothschilds, they did come in and help save the U.S. banking system. And the author says it's almost like they had their own Federal Reserve. And I think they kept doing that a lot, along with people like J.P. Morgan up until 1907. And then they had such a really bad crisis that it scared the politicians into thinking about creating a central bank so that this wouldn't keep happening. And of course, they met at Jekyll Island in 1910 to draw up the plans for the U.S. central bank, and they didn't call it a central bank, of course. They called it the Federal Reserve System. They split it into 12 regions to make it look decentralized, but it was anything but decentralized because the New York Fed has been in control ever since. It's the biggest regional bank. And like Charles Lindberg Sr., who was a congressman from Minnesota, said, and he was an opponent of the Federal Reserve Act, this is a great crime. It's going to create a great money trust. And here we are over 100 years later, and everything he said has come true. But of course, he was probably considered a conspiracy theorist at the time, even though I don't think they used that term then. The term conspiracy theorist was created by the CIA in the 60s. But there you go. That's how I see things. You can't have one without the other. In this case, it's the central banks, Wall Street, and government blooming or doing really well. If you get rid of one, it's not going to be as easy. And is it any wonder that as the system gets more and more under threat as it is now, with all the debt massively growing, with interest on the debt, interest service on the debt growing as well, interest rates being unable to be kept low, we're seeing the drums of war beat. We're seeing a lot of speculation on Wall Street, and that's why you will see that the mainstream media, big corporations, government, central banks, they all go along with the narratives. You won't see the Fed stand against, U.S. foreign policy. You will see maybe the White House go a little bit against monetary policy, but all in all, they are all scratching their backs. And the same thing goes for Congress. They benefit from this greatly because they get the access to free money or credit. But can they keep this charade, this game going forever, where only the crowd and other Wall Street types and status always benefit? I think we're getting to a point, and that's being manifest by wealth inequality, social division, and other things that, it can't keep going. But how it will end up collapsing this symbiotic relationship is anyone's guess. But I think it's something we need to keep an eye on. And we can almost see the Fed already and other central banks coming to the rescue again with more liquidity, especially if we continue to see these bond yields go up. And yesterday they went up because retail sales were strong. And people might say, well, that's good for the economy. But Zero Hedge had a good article here where they point to the fact that Americans weren't buying more. They're just having to spend more to buy the same, which means the currency is being debased. There's inflation. So if anything, we've got stagflation in the system. So I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to quickly look at where the markets are this morning. It's 8:06 a.m. London time. We got spot gold at 23.7350. It's down about $10. Yes, it rebounded well yesterday. Overnight, we got up to almost 2,400. The high was 92. The low overnight has been 68. Silver is looking good, I would say, even against gold. We're approaching that 80 level in the ratio, but this morning it's like underperforming a little bit. We're down about 40 cents at 28.45. High's been 29.03 and the low 28.29. Dow futures is down 50. NASDAQ 100 is down 12. S&P futures down 6. Yeah, the currencies are pretty steady this morning. Yesterday, of course, the dollar continued to rise quite sharply against the yen, and that could be another sign of danger for liquidity in the system, because it could force the BOJ to come in and try to stop the yen from weakening, and that would, of course, drain liquidity from the yen carry trade. In terms of China, we had strong GDP data today. Do I believe the Chinese data? I mean, I believe them as much as our data. But their first quarter GDP came out at 5.3% annualized. It was expected to drop from 5.2 to 4.8. So maybe the Chinese economy isn't doing as bad. And as I said, bond yields yesterday spiked, especially in the US. We saw the 10-year spike over 10 basis points, which is a big move. Right now it's unchanged at 463. The 2-year got up to almost 5%, and right now it's at 4.95. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.